Hello and welcome to The Real Estate. I'm Mandlkazi Mpahlwa. Today we'll be unpacking the increasingly popular investment trend of fractional ownership. We take a peek at a communication company's dynamic office environment. And in our resident expert slot, Home Run, we get back to property basics when Hilal Asher from LTech Properties talks to us through the realities of realty investments. Now, fractional ownership is an investment trend that's been around for a few years now, and it's not just linked to immovable property. With tight times upon us, it's definitely picking up in popularity. And coming to us from our Cape Town studio to explain all the ins and outs, I have Dirk Wilson from Fractional Ownership. Dirk, welcome to The Real Estate, and thank you very much for joining us. My first question, really, what are the key differences between fractional ownership and timeshare? Because some people liken it to timeshare, for example.
Hi, Mandla. Firstly, thank you for having me on your show. Fundamentally, fractional ownership can be defined as shared ownership and shared usage of a luxury leisure asset. Now, you just mentioned it doesn't have to be applied only to property. It can be applied to luxury boats, planes, helicopters, and now even handbags. Can you believe it?
Handbags?
So fundamentally, yeah, there's companies in the UK that are fractionalizing handbags out of London now. So really the concept can be applied to anything that's a leisure use asset, but fundamentally the property market really is where the market is at the moment. It represents 90% of the market in South Africa currently.
90%? That high? But then
Correct.
There's the issue of ownership. Do you actually get to own the property, part of it?
Well, fundamentally the way it works, if I can give it to you in layman's terms, you'll get a company, that will shelf company, will purchase the asset into the company. Let's talk about a property now. So let's talk about a unit in Bloberg, Horizon Bay in Cape Town. The company will purchase the asset, put it into the company. They'll then sell shares in that company, which entitles you to usage. So fundamentally, your share value is underpinned by the actual value of the property. So assuming the property increases in value, which it should do, your share will naturally increase in value over time.
Well, I mean, the property sector is experiencing some tough times, like all sectors at the moment in the country. When it comes to financing that purchase, can one source finance, or do you have to have cash in hand?
Well, quite interesting. Last week at the Fractional Ownership Conference in Cape Town, which our company organised,
which we'll talk about a little bit, yeah.
Yes, there was a launch of end-user fractional ownership finance, which we see is going to really boost this market going forward. This will only be applicable to certain developments that meet a very, very strict criteria for the lender, which will also protect the consumer going forward as well.
All right, talking about that conference in Cape Town, what were some of the most interesting outcomes?
I think finance, the launch of fractional ownership finance is what the market's been sitting waiting for with bated breath. So that was quite interesting to come out of that. Also, the mixed views from the two leading economists as to the future of the property market in South Africa. It's literally a crystal ball. Who knows really what's going to happen?
True.
But what we did see, the market sentiment was that the market should pick up towards the second quarter of 2009. And naturally, with the fractional ownership property market being underpinned by property values, there's good times ahead, and probably a good time for developers to be purchasing fractional ownership stock in the current market climate to push through value-added price per share into the market over the next 6 months.
Well, apparently we're seeing a lot of interest from foreigners as well in regards to fractional ownership. Tell us more about that.
Well, if you can use our website as a measuring stick, which is quite nice, it's a generic media, let's say. We have about 50,000 people a year looking at our site. 26% of these users are from the global platform. We like to define those as the global users, predominantly coming from the UK, Australia, Dubai, the Netherlands, and New Zealand. An interesting question there was why those territories? And we see there's a lot of expats looking back into South Africa to possibly put a toe back in the water, invest into fractional ownership for the usage that they'd like to have while they're in the country, or just purely as a speculative investment over a long period of time. Even though fractional ownership should not be seen as a speculative property investment, it's a lifestyle investment. But the interest from the global market is definitely quite hot into Southern Africa right now.
Talking about being a lifestyle investment, what type of properties are we looking at? Obviously, your higher end of the market.
Well, yes, the market, what we see as classic fractions. If I can give you a working example, let's say a villa in San Lemire, Golf Estate in the south coast of Natal. You can possibly buy a share, a 1/13th share, which will entitle you to, let's say, 4 weeks usage per year. That share could be valued at anything between 250 and 275 in the current market value.
Okay.
But let's say over 2009, 2010, you could possibly see that share selling for 300,000, let's say, as the property values increase and demand shrinks.
Well, we've touched on the advantages of fractional ownership. Some of the disadvantages of offloading fractional ownership, for example. You decide as an investor, you need the cash, you want to sell it off. What are the technicalities there?
Okay, first you've got to match a seller with a willing buyer.
Yes.
Always the case in any property transaction. Currently, I think the issue that sellers are facing at the moment, resellers for the secondary market, is how do they price the on-sell of their fraction? So we get a lot of calls saying, guys, I've got a share, how much do I sell it for? And it's really saying, well, how long's a piece of string at the moment? You've got to look at the current demand in that estate. So let's say there are no fractions left at San Lemire. Naturally, you could possibly get a higher return on your share. But I think to give you a clear answer, there is no formula, industry formula where a buyer can use this formula to come to their resale share price.
Okay, what would be your advice for anyone who's keen on getting into fractional ownership?
Well, from a consumer perspective, we would strongly recommend that they ask the seller or the promoter if they're a SAFI-approved member. Now, SAFI is the South African Association of Fractional Intermediaries. They're a self-regulatory governing body that basically aim to protect the consumer. So we encourage consumers to ask the promoter if their development and if their company is a SAFI-approved member, because there's quite a strict criteria to become a SAFI-approved member in this market. Okay. We would also then ask the consumers to speak to the seller and say, look, give me a breakdown of the levies for the next year, and to ensure that the levies will not increase, because as you know, with fractional, the levies will be shared amongst all the shareholders, typically 13, and you wouldn't want to get any nasty surprises 6 months down the line with an increase in levy. So ask those two questions. I would say another third question to ask would be, question the daily rates that the guys are promoting when you come to rent out your unused time, because sometimes the guys are they're promoting the highest possible rate you can get, and it leads to disappointment later down the line. So be realistic about the income return you get on the rental of your unused time, and draw your conclusions from that.
Talking about time, Dirk, we've run out of time. Thank you very much for coming through.
Thank you very much.